Hey, if you clicked on this video just for the editing tips, there's gonna be a timestamp down below that you can click on. I don't wanna waste your time, but if you are interested, I live full-time in that SUV behind me, traveling around taking landscape photos and making videos like this one. Recently, I've been making daily videos about my travels through Canada and Alaska that have photography sprinkled in, but also living on the road and just things like that. So if you're into that, just keep watching. And if you're not, like I said, timestamp down below. Thank you for checking it out regardless. Let's get on with my day. Hello, how are you?
Hello, how are you doing today?
Just looking for a token for the shower. We've got our tokens. I'm coming for you, shower. It's gonna be the best 12 minutes of my life. Ooh. Not bad. All right, time to find some coffee. Hello, how are you? Can you do the...
Oh, why you look so sad? Oh. Are you cold? Hi. Oh. Oh, you just wanted some love. Oh, yeah. Oh.
All right, worked in that coffee shop for like 3 hours on the photos we're about to talk about for the episode from yesterday. Now we're going to go into this library, hopefully find a quiet corner, and talk about some of these photos. Here we go. Public libraries are the best. I have this entire bottom floor to myself, meaning audio should be okay, and we're not gonna bother anyone while we sit here and talk about these photos. So all we're really gonna do is just talk about a few of the photos that was from yesterday's episode. There was a ton of things to go through, and there was a few things that I was doing while I was editing them that I thought maybe it would be fun to share them with you. It's a few things that I probably talked about in past videos, but if you haven't seen those, of course, then these might be new to you. So let's jump into Lightroom, take a look at some of the photos.
All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is a bit of an organizational tip, and it is when you are dealing with different bracketed exposures or panoramas. You can use it for all types. And the case for yesterday was I was taking bracketed panoramas, meaning I just have a ton of images, although the result of maybe 15 images is only one image by the end of it. So what we're going to do is use the stacking feature or capture by time. So the stacking feature is basically a way to come in to your library, select a bunch of images, and then group them together if you want to. So in my case, what I'm going to be doing is going from the first image of the panorama to the last image of the panorama and grouping those together. However, for you, it might be useful for your bracketed images or your panorama images, or like I said, both. So one way you can come in here is actually come in and right-click and go to stacking and go to auto stack by capture time. Now, if you look at the bottom down here, there's a bunch of stuff happening. So it says 40 right here, or it says 14 right here. And if I decrease this time, so what I'm telling it to do is that it only stacks images that were taken within 5 seconds of each other. So from the first image to the next image, if it was taken within 5 seconds, it'll stack those together, and so on and so forth. So if I select 5 seconds for this, you'll see down here there's a 3, a 3, a 3, a 3, and what that's doing is stacking those bracketed images that I was taking with my camera one after the other. So it'll auto stack those. Now the problem with this for me is that most of this folder is not bracketed or panorama images. So I'm not going to use this feature for this. You can see that it says 91 stacks, 71's unstacked. That means it's not going to stack all those images that weren't bracketed. However, for my case, I want to stack the images that were part of the pano, not necessarily the bracket. But this might be something useful for you for your bracketed images. So I'm going to hit cancel. And so I'm going to actually come in here and just manually do it as an example. So this is the first image of a pano, and this is the last image of the pano. I'm going to hold shift before I select that second one, and all I'm going to do is go to Command G as a keyboard shortcut, or Control G if you're on Windows. Now, these commands only work when you're in the Library tab. However, if you're in the Develop tab, you can always right-click, go to Stacking, and go to Group into Stack. So for example, I'll show you one more time. Select all of these, right-click, Stacking, Group into Stack. This still works in the Develop tab. However, the shortcut only works in the Library tab. So you can see that I've already gone through and selected and done this for a few of the other panoramas. All right, so the next step might help you in choosing which image you end up editing out of all the images you end up taking. This is a question I get asked a lot, which is how do I choose which image is the best one to end up editing? You might be wondering why it's important, and in this particular waterfall shot, I'm going to end up editing this image for a couple hours by taking it into Photoshop, maybe doing some luminosity masking, maybe warping it to look a little bit better straight out of camera because I'm blending some panos together, and it's just going to be a pretty involved edit. So I don't want to end up editing an image that doesn't have the best quality to it. Now you might be wondering, what does that mean? So what happens if you have a better composition but worse light, or better light and a worse composition? So it's just honestly a process of elimination, going through all of your images, looking at which ones might have better light, or which ones might have better composition for when you were there, or just trying to pick which one is the best of both worlds. Something that helps me a lot is going through and doing some quick preliminary edits so I know which images have specific light or how much data is in them. So we're going to use this particular image that I've already kind of done a preliminary edit on and as an example. So let's jump in here. I'm going to actually reset it so you can see what the image is. And now I'm not in love with this particular pano stitch. I'm actually going to end up using pt-GUI to fix some of these things, but this was good enough for this example. So the first thing I always do is check to see how much data is in the image. And I do this with a lot of images, regardless if it's a pano or not. And I bring up the exposure to see all of the data in my shadows, to see how good it is, how clean it is. That looks pretty good. And then I also bring down the exposure to see if I can recover this highlight detail here to get all this information here. Because if I just reset this, it looks like a white blob. I actually can't tell what data is there to use in the edit. So that's one of the first things I'm going to do. The next thing I'm going to do is come in and just do my normal quick edit, which is Adobe Color to landscape, come down here, add some blue calibration, do a little bit of this, and then you might be wondering why I'm not using a preset, and that's because, well, I want to show you what I'm doing rather than using a preset. I think that's a bit too warm. Let's come down here and add some contrast, and let's bring down the highlights. Let's bring up the shadows just a little bit, and let's crop this bottom half out because I know that I'm not going to use that. Maybe a little bit more. And all I'm trying to do here is just see what the potential of the image is. So how is it going to look with just a few things tweaked in Lightroom? Let's bring down the saturation just a little bit. And so now that I have this, this is pretty close. Let's bring up the whites. Let's bring down the highlights a little bit more. And you can even get a little bit more detailed, so I can hit Shift M, start creating some radial filters here, and kind of decrease the exposure here. If I wanted to hit Shift M again and create some more light here. It really depends on how much you want to add in. So I'm just going to bring up the whites here. And this is kind of like pseudo light painting very quickly in Lightroom. So now that I have that quick edit done, this is going to tell me, okay, this particular image has light in these areas on the tree. It has light here on the rock. It has light here on the tree over here. It's a little bit bright here on the rock. And what that's going to tell me is that this is the image that I would manipulate in Photoshop and make it look a little bit better using luminosity masks. But how am I going to paste this or copy it into the other images that I want to compare it to? So all I'm going to do is on a Mac, it's Shift-Command-C. That's going to bring up your copy settings window. I'm going to actually check all besides the crop because it might depend on the image. We're going to hit copy. And let's say I wanted to come in here. I'm just going to pick a random image. I don't have any other stacks done, so we're just going to pick this one. And then I'm going to hit Shift-Command-V to paste those settings. And that's just going to give me a quick idea of how that image is going to look with just a quick edit. Now I'm going to compare this image to the other image, and then I'm going to look at where the light is. So one thing I want to do first is make sure that these are roughly the same if you end up using radial filters. But again, this is not something I normally do, just as an example. And what I'm looking for is just the detail in the highlights, the details in the shadows, how this water looks, for example, comparatively to the one we just quickly did. You can see that it's a little bit brighter in the other image, and so that might tell me that that's the image I want to end up using. It might tell me I might want to use a different image. So the whole premise here is that you can just copy and paste the settings to all of the images that might be candidates for one that you want to put more time and effort into editing, because those little edits might tell you this image is better than the other one in terms of the light. Because a lot of the times when you're looking at a flat image or a raw, you can't tell how bright some of the highlights are or how dark some of the shadows are until you start adding edits to it, and then it might really show up which particular capture you had was better than the other one. Okay, so next up, this tip is very quick. It was just one that I noticed as I was doing some edits from images from yesterday, which was if I hit, let's see, I'm gonna come in here and turn these masks off, is that when I was trying to white balance this particular image, I come in here and do auto, it ends up making these clouds just a little bit too warm. And you can notice in the background that the blue looks like a nice saturated blue, and it was sunny out, so 5800 should be close enough in terms of my white balance. But these clouds are just a little bit too warm. So what I could do is just cool down the entire image, but that's gonna end up affecting my shadows, which I don't want. So what I did is I actually came in here and created a luminance range mask, and all I did for that is actually, let's just delete it, and I'll just start over again. So I come in here, create new mask, luminance range, and then I just select the cloud, and I'm gonna hit show luminance map, and then I'm gonna drag this a little bit so it spreads into some of those other clouds just a little bit. That's probably a bit too much. Let's bring this down. And then all I'm gonna do once I do that is just cool off that part just a little bit. And it's gonna give me a little bit more balance into that cloud rather than it looking too orange. So the other great thing about this is if I wanted to cool it off extra and then warm up the entire image, I could do that. And now you have a little bit more room to balance out your image depending on the two different color temperatures you're trying to balance out, just using the luminance range. You can also do this with the color range mask. It just depends which one is easier for you. In this particular sense, all of the highlights and all of the clouds are what is mostly too warm. So that's a quick tip there. The next quick tip I have for you is when I was editing this particular eagle photo, let me hit reset here. Pay attention to the histogram over here. My histogram is basically telling me the entire image is in shadow. However, I don't really care about most of the background. What I care about is this eagle. So one way I did this edit was the very first thing I did is I came into my crop tool and I cropped down just to the eagle. And what that's gonna do is you can see my histogram shifted. Let's add just a tiny bit more. And I'm trying to only include the eagle, none of the background, because it's gonna trick my histogram into thinking there's too much shadow. And now I'm getting a much better idea of how many highlights are here. And what I can do is just bring up the whites or bring up the exposure of the image a little bit based off of that. And you can do your entire edit for just around the eagle, and then you can come back out here and then recrop your image. All right, so the last quick tip I have for you is when I was using the select subject mask, a lot of the times it'll end up selecting more than I want, but it's not hard to fix and it's something we can easily manipulate. So for example, using the same eagle photo, if I want to bring up the brightness of the eagle or bring down the brightness of this dead tree that he's standing on, the problem is if I come in here and create a mask and go to select subject, what it's going to do is end up selecting him and the tree. So if I came in here and brought down the exposure, it does a great job bringing down the exposure on the tree, but it also brings it down on him. So something you could do is you can either use an intersecting mask, meaning it will only include the two masks combined, but for this particular one, we're actually just going to subtract and go to a linear gradient, and then I'm just going to subtract from the mask roughly like this, and I'm going to bring it a little bit sideways so that it is affecting a little bit more of the light over here rather than over here. Now if I hover over my mask, you can see how it's affecting the eagle and the tree. You can also hit O so it'll permanently show you this. So we can move this around, and that's good about right there. I'm gonna hit O again to get rid of it. And then I'm just gonna bring down the exposure on the tree and then bring down the highlights. And that's gonna make it where I can now manipulate the brightness of the eagle rather than not the brightness of the entire tree and background. Super helpful. One other thing I did was, another great example is I wanted to just brighten up a little bit of the shadows on the eagle. So let's say I did this, created a radial gradient, bring up the shadows or bring up the exposure. But what it's going to do is kind of create a halo effect around him. So all I'm going to do on this one is go to intersect mask with select subject. And what that's going to do is now make my mask just this. So this was my radial gradient, this is my select subject, and it creates this. So I could actually come in here and probably make this a little bit smaller if I wanted to, and move some feathering because I already have this intersected. And now it's just creating this mask. So if I really wanted to brighten him up, obviously that's too much, you could do that, but it makes you hone in on that select subject tool even though it's not giving me the exact subject, it's including that tree. This is something that might be helpful. I use this a ton in a lot of my images. I use this when I'm using radio filters to create light, using the subtract tool or the intersect tool. It's super helpful, so I hope it's helpful for you. All right, so that's pretty much all the editing tips I have for you today. So if that's why you tuned in, thank you for watching, and as always, you can like the video, consider subscribing if you loved it, and if you want to support me in more ways than that, there's a little link down below where you can buy things like prints, check out my Colorado fall workshop that still have spaces left, or check out some digital wallpapers. Regardless, thank you for watching, and if you're staying for the long run here in terms of what we're doing for sunset tonight, I'm not entirely sure. It's pretty overcast. I still need to get dinner, and I got a lot of editing to do. So stay tuned for that, and I'll include you along the way, as always. Yeah. Well, not sure we're gonna get much of a sunset here. Look at that little guy. What is he doing? What's going on over there? Just a glacier lagoon out here. That's all ice. I didn't even know this was here. I just took a random road.
Well, as you can tell, it is pretty overcast and rainy, so I don't think we're gonna get much sunset color. So I think I'm gonna end the episode here, and I hope you enjoyed those editing tips or just that day in the life here in Alaska. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Later.